stick by you all the way through.
Welcome back to Her Rules Radio. This is Alex Jamison, your hostess, your life coach, your health coach, your success mentor, in your pocket, in your earbuds. In today's episode, we're talking about women's rage and anger. Yeah. Why we feel disconnected from it, why we have opinions about it, why we are so judgmental about it, and the impact that it has on us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and the impact that it has on our ability as women to create and do and be fully realized in the world. There is such a lot to talk about. And my guest today is Soraya Chemaly. She wrote the book, Rage Becomes Her. It's an incredible book. It covers everything. It covers racism, sexism, all the isms, and how rage and anger is used against women it's like this thing that's dangled over us, this fear that we have of being called crazy, of being judged, of being belittled, of being ignored, how our emotions are used against us as women to keep us small, and how we end up doing it to ourselves and to other women, right? We use these words. I talked about this on last week's show, how we got to stop calling each other crazy, how we got to stop saying, oh, she's insane, that kind of thing, because it diminishes. And, by the way, it makes it harder for people to heal their own mental illnesses or seek help for it. But it also disconnects us from each other. And that is a huge problem. I find that through the work that I do with women as a coach and mentor, that our disconnection from other women is one of our greatest sources of stress, sadness, anxiety. And that having great, supportive female friendships is one of the hardest things for us as we go through adulthood. You might have heard my own story that I was kind of mean-girled in middle school, and it has kept me nervous around groups of women for my whole life. It wasn't until I was almost 40 when I started to realize, oh my gosh, I have a lot of friends, but they don't know each other because I only feel comfortable with one woman at a time. So having more than one woman in the room with me made me nervous. And I realized it was partially because I was afraid that I'd be gossiped about or that I would get kicked out of the cool girls club again. But there's also this way that we dangle getting cut out of the group if we are too emotional or too angry, right? Our anger is actually one of our most powerful resources. It's how we connect with what's true for us. Rage, anger, anxiety also are signals that our boundaries have been violated. When we get angry, there's a sensation that comes with it. You feel a rush, you feel adrenaline, you might feel heat. You might have your own set of symptoms or, sensations in your body that come with anger. But have you ever sat with those sensations? Most of us try to disconnect from them or squash them with alcohol or sugar or food or sex or gambling or shopping. We do whatever we can to get rid of it because it's not ladylike to be angry. You're not a good woman or a good mother or a good wife if you're angry. So then you feel guilty on top of being angry, and then you internalize it. We internalize our anger and it becomes sadness or depression, which is much more gender acceptable. So this whole topic of women's rage, women's anger, may be the key to your unfolding, may be the key to you becoming more fully yourself, right? How can we really be ourselves if we're not allowed to or not allowing ourselves to express our anger? We also go into the racially tinged aspects of women's rage. Really important. Now, there's a couple of little audio glitches on this interview. They're towards the end. So, if you hear a moment of silence or a little flub in the audio, keep going. It's brief. The interview's great. Really loved this book. I highly recommend it. Rage Becomes Her. Coming up. Soraya Shamali, thank you so much for being here on Her Rules Radio.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
This book, Rage Becomes Her, you know it's a good book when the book has writing all over it. Almost every page is dog-eared.
That's very happy making.
Yes. I love it. At a certain point, I'm like, I have to stop dog-earing every single page. There's no point. Every page has something good on it.
Well, thank you.
So this topic of women's rage, madness is so dense, so rich, so timely, and there's a lot of history behind it too. So I want to talk about your daughter. You're a mom.
Yeah. I got 3.
Yeah. And the topic of raising girls, I think, really cuts to the heart of why we talk about women and our anger, because as women, we are very concerned with raising our children right, in quotes, whatever that means. So how has having kids impacted, or was it one of the reasons why you wrote this book in the first place?
So it's so interesting, right? Because I think I did what a lot of women do, which is to feel that it was acceptable to be angry on behalf of others more than angry on my own behalf. And so I would say I had a pretty traditional upbringing, Catholic, firstborn girl, very studious, rule follower. By the time I was 11 or 12, religiosity didn't sit right with me, mainly because I was looking around and I thought, why is it that women can't be priests? And that was like pulling a very small thread, and I'm still pulling it. And so what really struck me about being, and my family was Catholic and Anglican, what really struck me about being a mother was the long tail of that early childhood socialization. Because what I really didn't want to do was unconsciously reproduce gender biases that I had grown up with and that I really struggled with, because I really felt that they were silencing and oppressive. And so, yes, I would say that being a mother kind of ramped all of that up. And I was very ardent feminist in high school and in college, but I kind of took my feminism to work, and I thought, things will progress and I'll be a feminist at work. And of course, the minute you have children, and not even if you have children, if you're a woman in the quote unquote fertile zone, your entire career is calibrated to the expectation of maternity, your tenure, your salary, like all of these rules and thoughts about women in the workplace, whether you have children or not. But when you have the children, you really hit a wall if you're a woman. You just hit the wall, and that becomes pretty evident pretty quickly, I think. So all of that happened at once. And yes, it was rage-inducing.
Yeah. There are so many things that are rage-inducing that you cover in your book. I mean,
I always say, don't read it before you go to sleep.
No, for sure. I mean, I have that rule anyway. I only read science fiction in bed. But there are so many reasons why we are not allowed to be angry. That's kind of the
Absolutely.
Right? That's kind of one of the main points of the book.
Yes, that is.
So what are the top 3 that you can name off the top of your head?
Well, I think the mechanism is that being angry is gender transgressive. It means we're claiming a role that is thought of as masculine, the authority, the control, the violence that we associate with anger. All of that is well within the purview of masculinity. It confirms masculinity. But when women act in ways that and I want to make this distinction, that we recognize as anger, meaning its externalization, its vocalization, its effects on the environment, when women act in those ways, they're punished because they're breaking gender rules. Part of the point of the book is to say, well, I personally refuse to just acknowledge those ways of being angry, because women are angry and have a different standard of behavior. And we don't recognize that anger, and it ends up being incredibly harmful to us. And so in the same way that we're held to male standards in the physical construction of cities or in the way cars are built, or, there are all of these standards that we navigate around as women because the normal body is thought to be an able-bodied single man standing alone. So too is our anger treated or mistreated. But I would say that ultimately the reason our anger is kind of reviled and punished is because it's a demand that injustice be paid attention to. right? And
So,
if you can't fight in your own self-defense, that's a pretty powerful social mechanism, right?
yeah, it's a great way of keeping us quiet and good.
Yeah, that's right.
I want to go back to you talking about being raised in one of the Christian religions,
Yes.
Catholicism, etc. Did you feel the way I did when you discovered all these other goddesses out there that people worship, like Kali? I was like, oh man, they have the coolest angry goddesses in other
There are
cultures.
lots of angry goddesses, right? And we have, like, especially if you grow up Catholic, there's no feminine godhead in, like, the Trinity.
Mm-mm.
And every role that is associated with feminine humans in the divinity is, like, the closest you get is the Holy Spirit, right? I mean, Mary is not God, but she is the ultimate distillation of maternity,
Right.
right?
She's only giving, she's only loving.
Yeah, she's giving and she's loving and she's forgiving and she's porous and she's violated with no plaint and, like, go, 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 right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that having female godheads can really change the way people think of male and female roles. I will say, though, that, if you look at the situation that women in India, for example, find themselves in, I would say it's necessary, but not sufficient, because having female godheads has not significantly reduced the profound misogyny and violence that is evident in all of our cultures.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about the suppression of anger, or we alluded to it a moment ago.
Yes.
That women are trained to suppress it, to not even express it.
Right. To ruminate more than anything.
Okay. And
because men also suppress it. It just has it just comes out in different ways.
Right. So why is that a problem? What are the effects that it has on us? Although my audience is like, oh, I know what the problem is with that.
I know what the problem is, right? Well, even I was surprised. It really, if it gets diverted into socially acceptable behaviors. Sometimes that means women cry, right? Because crying affirms their femininity. And so it's not as threatening as saying I'm angry. Sometimes they explode, they vent, right? Venting is also not healthy. It actually has been shown to make you feel worse. And I find it interesting that there's an explosion of commercial anger rooms around the country where people can go and vent. They can throw things and break things, and you pay to go and do that, right? And the vast majority of their customers are women. And I'm like, don't pay to go vent. Like, that's just one more pink tax. Like, you have the right to be angry in a way that people can respond to with respect and in a way that doesn't hurt you. But paying to get angry in a way that hurts you is like the ultimate.
So I want to go into this point specifically, because there is science that suggests venting or raging or throwing things, breaking things is not helpful.
That's right. It's not helpful. And it's not helpful for a couple of reasons. One is because it does have this quality of rumination, which means you keep turning the thing over and over in your head, but you don't get beyond that to the point where there's a constructive analysis and a strategy for making change, right? Mm-hmm. And so rumination, which is socialized, it's a feminine behavior. Just sit there and mull it over, right? And that's when you hear women say, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Is there a problem? No, I'm fine. And no, I'm fine becomes second nature to many women, the way saying sorry does. Oh, sorry, right?
Is that the name of your follow-up book? No,
yeah,
I'm fine.
I know, right? Should we do that? Oh, sorry.
I'm fine and I'm sorry. Parts 2 and 3.
I'm sorry, I'm fine. It's a whole other thing.
So there's this whole other arm of research and science and practice, etc., that is all about, the body keeps the score, that your body holds onto trauma, right? The liver holds onto our anger, and that we need to do things to move that anger or trauma out. And I wonder, what's the difference in there? Well, perhaps those things are more therapeutic, and they actually don't just keep you ruminating. They don't keep you habituated to it. They do something.
I mean, I think there are a few things going on. One is, I'm not sure if you're saying the liver holds our anger from like a yoga source, but I think that it's very clear that anger it's very clear from research. It's now been implicated in all kinds of illnesses thought of as women's illnesses, right? So self-harm, disordered eating, greater levels of chronic pain, autoimmune diseases, recovery from cancer. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And it's not that I'm not saying anger will make you develop these diseases. But anger is definitely a component, and it is it's foundational to understanding the illness and then how to treat it. It's also very predictive of distress in physical and mental distress. But there really are ways in which, if a person is willing to start off by admitting anger, which is super hard for many of us, right? Just simply saying, oh, you know what? I'm angry. Because in fact, we're learned to disassociate from our anger. We're learned to stop reading the signs of anger. We're taught, we learn that thing. And then we're also taught to not even read the signs of anger in our bodies, the racing heart, the like push of adrenaline, all of these things that are happening. Sometimes it takes women hours, days, weeks, months, years to think, I was angry. That's what that was. I felt confused or I felt fearful, And so I think if we can be very self-aware and think, actually, you know what? I need to be able to admit to myself, I'm not a bad person if I say I'm angry. I have the right to be angry. An unfairness was done, or I was taken advantage of, or I was betrayed, which are sort of the reasons why people get angry. Admitting it's the first step. The second step is actually making meaning of it. And in a lot of the research that I saw, and all the research I saw, that was very important. Being able to say, what is my anger telling me? What information is it imparting? And who needs to deal with this with me, right? Because very often we're told that sadness is okay. So women are, very often women will say, oh, I'm so sad. But sadness is a retreat emotion into yourself, whereas anger is holding other people accountable. Mm-hmm. I'm angry because I'm doing 2 hours more chores every day, right? If you say that out, if you say, I'm so stressed, I'm so tired, someone can say to you, oh, just go take a bath, relax, light a candle.
Right, which keeps us really disconnected from our power.
Yes.
And one of the other main points of your book is that anger can be a true source of power. It can be an intrinsic motivator sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think we see that all the time. I mean, we see these movements of marginalized people. I mean, the Women's March was insanely peaceful, well-organized, quickly executed, and organic. But there is no doubt that it was fueled by intense anger, right? Like, we need to recognize the variety of expression of anger. We need to be able to respect the anger that is compassionate and fueled by empathy and driven towards social justice. I mean, why seed the ground and just go along with the idea that anger is somehow an intrinsically male emotion or a masculine quality, and that, also it's filled with contempt and disgust for other people, because that is just one small way of being angry.
Right. Okay, so there's many ways that anger communicates.
Anger, like Audre Lorde said this years ago, and I think it's really the kernel of this, anger is full of information. What is that information? And what is it? What can you do with that information, right? And the thing is, the world is hostile to women's authority and expertise, and that comes down to the world being hostile to women's knowledge and thinking and experiences. But anger is all knowledge, thinking, and experience. And we live in a world where we are ubiquitously objectified. You can't walk down the street without seeing a woman's arms or legs or breast or face. But anger is totally subjective, right? You have to say, I feel this way, which is it is the assertion of that subjectivity. And it's not comfortable. We make people uncomfortable with our anger. Yeah. But we do have this power that we're responsible for making people comfortable. So okay, let's make them comfortable with the discomfort that we all have to feel now, because we have a lot of discomfort we have to feel.
And as we start to name our anger, even just naming it, I am angry and this is how I feel, it connects us. And this is some of the work that I've been doing with women for the past 17 years. It connects us to our bodies and our experiences.
That's right.
So that we stop, I'm going to say gaslighting ourselves, although I don't think that's really what I mean. But we stop denying ourselves and start making our experience worthy.
Yeah, I agree. Like, if you can respect yourself and say, my anger has value, which is hard because we're also discouraged from defending ourselves, right? Like, we're socialized to always put others first, make people comfortable, use your nice voice, smile more often, think about others, wait your turn. It gets very hard to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what I need.
Yeah. And so my husband he's like a corporate consultant.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. But he works in these big companies and he goes and he works with CEOs and their whole C-suite, these executives. And he comes home and he tells me these stories. And he's like, most of these leaders and leadership teams are men.
Yeah.
And there's this erroneous idea that men are not emotional at work.
Right.
And that women in leadership, women can't handle leadership because they'll be too emotional.
Right.
And we know that women are penalized by men and by women for being, quote, emotional at work, whether that's anger or sadness or anything.
Any expression.
Any self-expression whatsoever. But he's like, I hear these stories. I'm like, these dudes are just as emotional as women.
Absolutely.
They just tend to express anger or even rage more than worry or sadness.
And they're rewarded for that.
Yes.
That's the thing, because it confirms masculinity, and because anger and masculinity and power are so entangled. I mean, study after study after study shows that they're rewarded for that. And it's interesting too, right? Because people actually, in the same way that they think angry woman is an oxymoron, they think sad man is an oxymoron. So a man who shows sadness is actually also punished because he's disdained as weak or vulnerable or too feminine.
Right.
And that has huge implications for our society. We see it every day. We see it in loneliness. We see it in mass violence. We see it in guns. That is a really debilitating gendering of emotion, that bifurcation. Mm-hmm. But women are punished for showing anything remotely resembling anger.
So I was just listening to an interview with Michelle Obama today about her new book, and she talks about how she has to divorce her words from anger. Right?
Yes, she has to.
She cares very deeply, and on top of it, she's a Black woman.
Right. She has no wiggle room at all. No leeway.
No leeway whatsoever.
Right.
So the bar to be even keeled or to be nice in our delivery is much harder for women of color, the hardest for Black women, for sure.
Yes. I mean, that's right. Sorry.
Well, we see what happened just a little while ago with the Kavanaugh nominations. Mm-hmm. This man who was yelling, he was angry, he was fiercely frustrated.
Yeah.
And he was seen as patriotic and passionate.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because Christine Blasey Ford started her testimony off by saying she was terrified. And I think it's arguable, and Brittany Cooper, who wrote Eloquent Rage about Black women's anger, makes this point, and I think it's such an important point to think about, because Ford could start off her testimony saying, I'm terrified. And then she was demure and composed and very deferential during the entire proceeding, right? And in many ways, she was performing in the way that a proper young white woman is taught to perform. Whereas Anita Hill couldn't even say she was terrified. She stayed as completely neutral and composed as humanly possible without
just the facts.
Just the facts.
Zero emotion allowed.
Right. That's right. Because in her case, the bar was that much higher to be seen as rational or thoughtful or emotional. And, I think over and over again, we see this assumption that no matter what, men have a core of assumed rationality that they can count on, whereas women don't. At our core, in theory, according to all of these ideas of gender, at our core is chaos and irrationality, So when we get angry, there's no presumption that we're thinking straight, because we don't think straight to begin with.
Right. And I just talked about this on a recent episode about the fear that women have of being called crazy.
Absolutely.
That it was terrifying very recently. I mean, less than 100 years ago, you could get put in an insane asylum by your husband for any reason.
That's right. And actually, in some of the research that I found, I thought this was really remarkable. One study showed they asked women what they dreaded the most in response to their anger. And as you know, in this book, I write a lot about violence and the threat of violence, and whether that's stranger violence or acquaintance or domestic violence. The differential between men and women's anger is often fear. Women are fearful, so they cannot express themselves. But when asked what they dreaded the most, it wasn't violence. It was mockery. And that floored me. I was like, wow. And then I thought, okay, that's right. Because, we go from being little princesses to hormonal teens to high maintenance bitches to hysterical nags. And every step of the way, there's a stereotype: angry Black woman, crazy white one, hot Hispanic girl, sad Asian girl. It's constantly, constantly, constantly this making fun of girls and women when they're trying to say what's important to them.
Yeah. We are just dismissed, which just makes me angrier.
Yes.
But I want to talk about, we talked about some of the physical effects that this has on us. I mean, it really does have a physical backlash on us. We keep it in, it really wrecks us.
Yes.
But it also affects how we are able to not just put ourselves out in the world. I want to talk about risk.
Yes.
This is such an important topic to me. I'm raising a young man.
Yes.
But as growing up, I was lucky enough to have a dad who was a soccer coach, and he really pushed us to be on teams, and we were pushed and encouraged and supported to take risks in some ways.
Physical aggression.
Yes, and I feel but here's what's crazy. In college, I took my first, what do you call that? Self-defense course.
Yes.
And it was one night. We went to a self-defense course, we practiced yelling, and then we practice hitting.
Yeah.
And I actually made contact with my partner and hit my partner I was practicing with, and I freaked out.
Because you hit your partner?
I hit them, which was what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And I started crying. I was like, oh my, I didn't think it would be hard to do, but it was so hard to own and be, protect my boundaries.
Yes.
So if it's that hard for somebody who grew up playing very aggressive sports, how hard is it for us to be risk takers in our lives if we're not allowed to be angry?
So, I mean, I write, there's a Brazilian writer who I quoted in the book who, I think her article was called Brazilian Women Can Yell, because she also went through a self-defense class. And she said one of the hardest things for them was being loud, even before being physical, right? Like just using your voice loudly and with authority and with power. And she said she couldn't do it. It was just so conflicting and hard. And these inhibitions are really powerful, right? And so I think that's very valid. I think, as I say in the book, we're taking risks all the time. We just don't think of them as risks because men don't experience them, right? So when women go out on dates with guys from dating apps, they take a huge risk that men don't, right? When women decide to go explore the world, they're taking huge risks. I mean, there are all these risks that involve navigating the threat of male violence, but that never gets count as risk-taking because it's just life for women, right? We just don't count it as risk.
But that is a nuance that men certainly don't understand, and most women don't really consciously think about.
Or want to, because it's frightening.
Oh, it's overwhelming.
Totally. When you really start thinking about why it is you park closer to doors and pay to go to a gym and, take cabs and buses instead of walking through the nice night. I mean, when you really start to tally up the costs, which are high, then you really start to understand the risks, But I do think that this element of taking physical risks and feeling physical power is important, which is why I wrote about Title IX, because Title IX, we tend to think of it as sort of sports, but it's really about leadership and public life, right? I mean, this is girls being taught to act in ways traditionally reserved for boys, physically strong, competitive, aggressive in one place, not aggressive in another place. To channel high emotion into physical excellence and mastery. All of that's really important. And I think that we're seeing young women in the political sphere as activists as a result of that. 2 generations of women now who have benefited from Title IX, and enough to have a legacy, an intergenerational legacy of women with that kind of power.
Now, what's currently going on with Title IX and good old Betsy DeVos? And this current administration.
Such a shit show.
It is a shit show.
It's just more of the kind of, it's one more cog to me in the destructiveness of know-nothing, science-denying, fact-denying, just creation of bullshit. It is so definitively harmful what is happening right now. The changes that they're making are based on kooky. It's not even science, it's just myths, rape myths. And the way it is feelings, right? We feel that this is bad. Whereas if you really look at any of the science, if you look at decades of research, if you talk to trauma survivors and you talk to experts and you understand what it means to have a trauma-focused approach, you would never, ever do what they're doing to dismantle Title IX protections.
It's pretty wild. And you talked about some really evil trifecta, the brutal trifecta, racism, misogyny, and, different kinds of religious phobias. Yes,
anti-Semitism or Islamophobia.
Yeah, and that's truly in full effect right now.
For sure. For like Black women Muslims, moving through space, waking up in the morning and going out into the world is a risk, right? You go out. And very often if women are dressed so that they are indicating their religion, they do that in a way that even their male counterparts don't.
Right.
They become an object, a symbol of their faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so, especially I remember after the Paris attacks, I think it was November 2000, I want to say 16, but it may have been 17, attacks against Muslims increased threefold, but the vast majority were against Muslim women.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was the man on the train in Seattle who harassed and then eventually killed men who tried to protect these young women. Those were Black Muslim women that he was targeting with hate.
Right. So all of these things that you write about, they are truly enraging. It's terrifying and it's enraging.
Right.
And I was very grateful that you wrote about what we can do.
Yes. There is an arc of hopefulness.
Yes. Yeah. And I thought it was really powerful to really go into the many layers of how women's rage is used against us, not just against women. And it's interesting. I don't necessarily think that there is a group of old white men in a room who are like plotting
there are
against us. But I'm like, but sometimes I'm like, man, maybe there are.
Yeah,
But it certainly feels that way. But it also has an effect on women's relationship with women.
For sure.
We keep each other down. We bat each other down. I got to say, white women are the worst. We are certainly a huge part of this problem.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, and I do write extensively about this. So does Rebecca Tracer. So does Brittany Cooper. I mean, the fact is that white women in the United States benefit from racial privilege. And so I would argue that what we saw happening in the last election was that the more gender inequality became evident in their own lives, like with every story, with harassment story, with, the video of Trump saying he could grab women by the pussy, with Me Too story, like every one of those heightened the sense of gender inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And in response to that, I think a lot of white women doubled down on their racial privilege and leveraged white supremacy to maintain their status.
Yeah.
And we never, I think that's always been the case in American history. And until white women renounce the vicarious power that they get from their closer association with resources and power, it will be it'll be a plague. And really, I think that's also why there's this huge fear of demographic change, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yes. It's why all those Ohio Republicans are telling white women that they need to have babies, or it's going to, they're trying to make it a law. It's a requirement for white women to have more babies.
Yeah. No abortion, no family planning, no birth control. It's crazy.
And I know that there are some white women listening right now who are like freaking out a little bit. It's okay. It's okay.
You mean because we're using the words white women?
Yeah, because we're talking about race at all. It's
right.
And it's okay. You're going to be fine. And this is important. Keep listening. Don't go anywhere.
It is hard, right? And that's why I said we have to become comfortable with discomfort.
Yes.
Because one of the things we don't talk about, I think, is white women's inequality in the intimate sphere. And a lot of that comes from religiosity. I say that as a person who came from a very religious household. But, white Protestant evangelicals and Catholics are strong supporters of systems that are authoritarian, beliefs that are authoritarian. And that affects gender equality. And we see it in the ritual silencing of women in churches like the Catholic Church. And we see it in these very rigid gender roles where women have control over, in theory, private life and men public life, or, those are not equal things. Like to posit that as equal is a really false equivalent that's damaging.
Yeah, I did a show with a friend of mine, Melanie Van Orden. She was raised Mormon in Utah, and she left the church at a pretty young age, in her early 20s. And now she does some work counseling women who are leaving the Mormon church. And it was specifically because she's like, I am a feminist and I am a womanist and I cannot stay in this. And it's very, very hard to...
It's hard because, you have to break with everything. I mean, it really does make you the killjoy. And it's disruptive, right? It's disruptive. This is why it's so important to pay attention to how intimate and granular gender inequality is in families, because it means breaking with traditions and habits and comfortable gender roles and male privileges. I mean, there's a reason why women in the United States initiate 69% of divorces, and men remarry and women don't, because inherent in the institution of traditional marriage is an enormous privilege for men. And that's why women are not interested anymore. They don't have to, because they're not as resource dependent. They can work, they can get health care, they can have solidarity, and a different constitution is corrupted by sexism often.
So one of the important questions that you pose in this book, and I wanted just to do a couple final minutes on this, because it seems such a simple question, but I think it might be one of the foundational issues that we need to face. Why does society deny anger to women? Rather than us focusing on ourselves and our experiences of it, if that's too hard for a moment, okay, let's think about why is it denied to us?
Well, I mean, I think that humans are really complicated, and a lot of humans like order. And the ordinal structure in our society is gender roles. And we assign gender, and then people's lives are shaped by that. Everything from the way we're talked to, held by our parents, dressed, there's really nothing that's not affected by these ideas. And I wanted to use anger as a lens into that, because I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like, even during our election, you could see the disparate treatment of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Whether you love or hate the woman, you have to clearly be able to see that she could not leverage populist rage the way those men did.
Right.
And that she walked a much finer line because she was a woman. And
she still had more votes, but
she still had more votes, right? But in fact, even parents looking at infants, brand new babies, if they see an agitated baby and they think it's a boy, they are inclined to say that he's aggressive and angry or, disagreeable. Yeah. But if they see the same baby and think it's a girl, she's sad, and she's vulnerable. And that then becomes a way to construct other forms of difference and oppression. Because if you're going to enact racist violence, it really helps to have someone to protect. And if the person you're protecting is a vulnerable woman or girl, and if that vulnerability is then racialized, then white women's vulnerability becomes the main lever for racial violence.
Yes.
And that's something that is so woven into the fabric of our society that no one really likes it or wants to hear about it.
Yeah.
Because it means enormous change.
Huge change on a cultural level, and in ourselves. We have to deconstruct our own internalized racism.
That's right. And that's why white women's tears, right? Like, a lot of people are offended by the term white women's tears, but it's not a matter of offense. I mean, white women's tears are weaponized regularly, and that is also a function of internalization. Like, oh, I'm really angry, but if I cry, then I get protected.
Right.
And that's a societal privilege, right?
Yeah. Now, I want my listeners to really take all of this in. Listen to this again. Get this book, Rage Becomes Her. This is the warrior's path. If you feel disconnected, disenfranchised, just frustrated, not knowing what to do in the world or in your own life, your rage, your anger is a really good place to start examining why am I angry?
Mm-hmm.
How have I suppressed it? Why has it been suppressed?
Or how is it coming out in ways that are really harmful, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious as one final question.
Yes.
This is called Her Rules Radio.
Mm-hmm.
So for your own children, what is a way of being with anger? What is a rule that you would like them to follow? A new rule around anger?
So I think this is true for boys and girls. I think that there are two rules. One is treat everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their gender. We don't teach people that, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race, and learn to listen. A lot of people have a hard time listening. Usually little children are pretty upfront.
They are.
They're going to tell you how they feel if they feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And boys right now don't feel safe saying, I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm vulnerable, I'm happy, I like pink. I mean, boys are held actually to much more rigid norms.
Yeah.
And that's because their gender is tied to higher status.
Yeah.
And so girls can be much more fluid because they have to empathize with boys and men in order to navigate the world. And that's not true necessarily. And what's happening now is more girls and women are saying, no, actually, you have to do that. You have to listen to us. You need to understand what it's like to move through the world as a Black Muslim woman, right? Or whichever iteration of personhood is at question in the moment. And so I would say as a parent that just teaching kids to be good people as opposed to ladies and gentlemen. Why have different rules for boys and girls? There's zero reason to have different rules of politeness or behavior, you know? That would be very important to me for parents.
Yeah. So do you have a next book you're already working on?
I'm 12 weeks into this one. I need a little more time.
Okay. I'll give you some space, but I'm going to keep tweeting you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on. It was really great to have you. And I'm going to encourage everyone again to go out and get Rage Becomes Her. I'll be posting it in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of
Okay.
the day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening into this week's episode. If you love the show, the best way that you can show it is to share it with some friends, share it with some family, and go on over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. We would appreciate it so very much. And don't forget that in a few days, I will be launching the 2019 Have It All Mentorship. This is a year-long mentorship coaching program that will be virtual and with a one-day retreat in New York City. Hello! So much coaching, guidance, support, and community. If you are ready for the hearts and the hand-holding and the hilarity, and if you're ready to really make changes in how you show up in the world and deconstruct some of the programming that you've been walking around with, including your relationship to rage or anger or food or body or sexuality, success, finances, spirituality, creativity, all of the above, check out my Have It All Mentorship. We begin January 5th, 2019, and we'll be meeting on every new and full moon throughout the year. How awesome is that? So go on over. I'll leave the show note link when you go to herrulesradio.com and check out this episode. You can find the link there, or you can follow me on Instagram at DeliciousAlex. Thanks for being here. I know you have lots of ways to spend your time. I appreciate you. I'll see you back here next week. Mwah.